In 1903, John D. Rockefeller founded the General Education Board with a staggering $180 million endowment, which translates to over $6 billion in today's money. The official public narrative was one of pure philanthropy, an effort to help children and improve America's schools. However, the internal documents of the General Education Board revealed a much different ambition. In their own written words, they described a dream of limitless resources where people yielded themselves with perfect facility to molding hands. They explicitly stated they would not try to make these people or their children into philosophers, scientists, authors, or statesmen, of whom they claimed to already have an ample supply. Instead, their stated task was simple: to organize children and teach them to do in a perfect way the very things their parents were doing imperfectly. The wealthiest family in American history did not design the system to create critical thinkers. They designed it to create obedient, predictable, and manageable workers who would never question the system employing them. Within 2 decades, this vision succeeded. By 1920, nearly every public school in America was operating under a Rockefeller-approved curriculum, using the same textbooks, testing methods, and institutional philosophy that treated children like factory products on an assembly line. Before 1900, American education looked entirely different. There was no standardized curriculum, no federal oversight, and no mandatory attendance laws in most states. Local communities controlled their own schools, and teachers focused on what parents wanted their children to learn. A classical education model, focusing on logic, rhetoric, and philosophy, was common even in rural one-room houses. Students were taught to think critically, question authority, and reason from first principles. Consequently, literacy rates were remarkably high. By some estimates, literacy in early 19th century America exceeded 90% among white populations, which is higher than what is observed today despite modern technology and funding. The shift occurred with the rapid rise of industrialization. Modern factories needed workers, not independent thinkers or entrepreneurs. They required individuals who could follow instructions, arrive on time, perform repetitive tasks without complaint, and accept authority without question. John D. Rockefeller, who built Standard Oil into the largest corporation in the world through complete vertical integration, controlling the wells, refineries, railroads, and distribution, saw an opportunity to apply this same strategy to human capital. By controlling education, he could control the values, aspirations, and worldview of the next generation. The General Education Board systematically engineered this new reality. They heavily funded university education departments at prestigious institutions like Columbia, Stanford, and the University of Chicago. They bankrolled research into scientific teaching methods and created modern teacher training programs that persist today. They also determined which textbooks were published, backing publishing giants like McGraw-Hill, Pearson, and Huff and Mifflin to ensure identical, carefully curated versions of history and science were taught from coast to coast. Furthermore, foundation lawyers drafted model legislation introduced in state capitals to mandate school attendance, curriculum requirements, and teacher certifications. Frederick Gates, the chief architect of Rockefeller's education plan, openly wrote in private correspondence about wanting to create a permanent dependent class that would never compete with the ruling elite, training the population to be contented with their station in life. The annual reports of the Rockefeller Foundation from 1913 to 1936 clearly document their funding of John Dewey's progressive education movement and behavioral psychology research. This funding promoted a factory model of schooling, complete with bells, rigid schedules, a requirement to sit still, and an emphasis on conforming to social pressures and artificial ranking systems. While everyone else's children were funneled into this system designed for compliance, a parallel education system existed for the ruling elite. The children of wealthy families like the Rockefellers, Carnegies, and Vanderbilt attended private classical academies. These institutions taught Latin, Greek, advanced mathematics, leadership, and critical thinking. This dual system created two entirely different outcomes by design. Before the turn of the century, education was seen as the cultivation of wisdom and virtue. Afterward, it became synonymous with job training. Liberal arts were systematically replaced with vocational tracking, sorting students into specific economic paths as early as middle school. The engineering ran deeper through the funding of behavioral psychology, including the work of figures like B.F. Skinner, which treated human beings as programmable entities responsive to stimulus and conditioning. This directly influenced classroom management and the development of standardized testing, such as the SAT and early IQ tests. These metrics were not neutral tools. They were designed to treat individuals as data points to be optimized and deployed based on the needs of the industrial system. Simultaneously, crucial subjects were removed or heavily sanitized. Civics education, which once required a deep analysis of the Constitution and the Federalist Papers, was reduced to the basic memorization of the three branches of government, avoiding any real critique of how power operates. Logic and philosophy disappeared entirely from standard curricula, preventing the working class from easily identifying propaganda. Classical history was replaced with narratives emphasizing exceptionalism, erasing the history of labor movements, and rebranding robber barons as captains of industry. Financial literacy was also excluded, leaving students with just enough math to balance a checkbook, while the elite learned estate planning, tax optimization, and investment strategies. By the 1920s, the school-to-work pipeline was fully operational across every state. The evidence of its success is visible in economic data. In 1900, nearly 40% of American workers were self-employed, but by 1950, that number dropped to 18% and today sits under 10%. Independent farming collapsed from 41% of the workforce to less than 2%. The General Education Board measured its success by how efficiently it shifted citizens away from self-employment and into wage dependency, creating a society reliant on massive corporations for survival. Today, the underlying philosophy of public education remains unchanged. Despite the introduction of computers, tablets, and smartboards, schools still rely on the same grade structures, rigid testing schedules, and factory bells designed to produce compliant workers. Because generations have passed through this exact system, it has become fully normalized as the only way education can function. However, historical and modern alternatives prove otherwise. Homeschooling, unschooling, classical education co-ops, and democratic free schools actively reject this forced curriculum. Data shows that homeschooled students frequently score 15 to 30 percentile points higher on standardized tests, maintain higher college GPA averages, and display greater civic engagement. Before compulsory public schooling, American innovation flourished through books, apprenticeships, mentorship, and the freedom to pursue individual talents without federal oversight or standardized testing metrics. The Rockefeller-designed educational structure continues to produce individuals who confuse credentials with knowledge and compliance with virtue. Meanwhile, the modern elite continue to send their children to private academies that emphasize leadership and critical thinking, preparing them to run companies rather than work for them. Breaking free from this design requires individuals to actively question institutional assumptions, explore alternative educational models, and intentionally teach children the very skills excluded from the public system, such as true financial literacy, propaganda identification, and critical structural analysis. The system was meticulously designed to function exactly as it does today, fulfilling John D. Rockefeller's explicit goal of creating a nation of workers rather than a nation of thinkers.